Hello and welcome to another live Q&A with me, Shakina. Today's session is all about your questions. So wherever you are in the world and wherever you are in your preparation journey, any question that you have, feel free to post it in the chat wherever you're joining from, whether that's YouTube or Facebook. Put it there, and those questions will come through to me, and I'm going to spend the next 60 minutes trying to answer as many of them as possible. So I'm um, just going to encourage you to post in your questions there. um, Wherever you join, at any time, if you join later as well, um, and you have or you're listening in right now and you have a question maybe that comes up during the session, you can ask that at any time. So um, feel free to do that. I have got a few hellos there, and hi to everyone saying um, hello in the chat. Some of you joining from India, from Dubai. That is lovely. Um, and I'm going to pick up this first question here from Ajay. And Ajay is joining us on YouTube. So I've got a question there from Ajay. How to write a letter to non medical professionals or non um, healthcare professionals. So um, just to answer that very quickly, the tip that I can give you there, Ajay, is to think about the reader and not worry too much about what kind of letter it is, or um, you know not to think too much about whether there's a certain way to write a letter to a non-medical professional. Definitely there's some guidelines, but generally the way that you would approach the writing task is the same whether you write regardless of your reader. And the way to approach it is to keep your reader in mind. So um, I'm going to put in a resource there, which is our writing guide. Our writing guide goes through all the criteria that you're marked on, and will take you through each of the criteria with questions that you can think about as you're reading your case notes and as you're preparing your letter, that will guide you on how you can write your letter. So I'm going to put that in the chat right now. um, this is on our writing page, so you will find that there. And essentially, there are two things that you can think about when you're writing any letter. The first is who your reader is, um, and what your purpose for writing is. So, who your reader is, you can think about what are they going to do in the patient's care that they need to continue to help them continue that care. So, and the second thing is whether they have an existing relationship with the reader, with the patient. Thinking about those two things, you can select the case notes that you need to, and focus on what they need to know to continue care. um, so that would obviously be sort of the general guidelines, but like I said, the writing guide has lots more tips there to help you um, with your letter. Okay, so I've got a question here from Shani, who joins us on YouTube. Shani is asking, can you share reading part A marking criteria? So, Shani, the way that reading part A is assessed is that it is marked by at least two trained assessors who do follow a marking guide to help them to mark your answers. However, with it's the marking guide is unique and separate to each test. It's not something that we have, but there are a lot of useful things that you can keep in mind when you are writing your answers. And the most important is actually to think about the question and to read it carefully, and answer only what the question is asking you. So, often in reading part A, especially for short answer questions, and even for the fill in the gaps or fill in the blanks questions, what happens is a lot of times candidates give too much information, and there's too much information and the answer isn't accurate. So that is definitely something that you can keep in mind, is to keep your answers short and precise. So that is the main tip I'm going to give you for thinking about your reading part A. I'm going to share a video in the chat that is a really great video that will help you understand a bit more about what I've just explained. It's got lots of examples of the kinds of things that can go wrong with a reading part A. And from that video, you'll be able to get some great sort of guidelines on how to approach the task, but more importantly, how to write your answers. And welcome to everyone joining in the chat. Welcome if you've just joined us. All right. I have got a question here from Jani, who joins us on YouTube. Could you please tell me, do we need to write articles in listening? Will marks be deducted if we don't write articles? So, Jani, the answer is you don't need to worry about articles. Articles are optional in listening part A. And if you've done any of our sample tests on our website, and you'll have a look at the answer key, you will see that articles are in brackets. So anything in brackets that's in the answer key in official tests, those words are optional. And the articles are definitely something that you don't need to worry about. All right, I've got a question here from RK. RK is asking, for today's visit, can we write in past tense? So he reported that he had a cough for the past 4 days, the examination revealed, or his reports showed. Or should we write in present tense? So, RK, generally, when you're writing about today's visit, you do write about it in past tense, and generally, and that's because you're reporting on an event that is completed, that's past. Um, but there are some differences that you could keep in mind. So, for example, if you are writing about your tests or vital signs which were accurate at the time of the visit, the past tense is usually appropriate, just like you've given in your examples there. I'm going to put in the a really great article that we have on this very topic, that gives you a few more scenarios where other tenses might be appropriate. So, for example, even though you're writing about today's visit, you might write about the patient's lifestyle choices. And obviously, lifestyle choices are facts, and they're sort of habits that someone does, and therefore those would present tense would be more appropriate there. So the article that I've just posted has some more explanation around that. But generally, if you're reporting on what happened at the visit, then that past tense would be usually appropriate for that. Okay, so I am okay, I've got a question here from Abhishek. So Abhishek is saying that he has completed sessions of all 4 modules, so subtests, And if I'm planning to write my exam in the next 1 month, is that enough to write and prepare for the exam? Is there any tips? Are there any tips from your side? So, Abhishek, it's great that you have been preparing and practicing for all the four subtests. Um, I'm sure you've definitely put in a lot of effort towards that. Um, One thing that we do tell our candidates is when they're preparing for OET, oftentimes what happens is you book your test with a certain goal in mind. So you might book your test because you have you have an interview lined up, or you have a possible offer lined up. But it's important to think about really giving yourself enough preparation time and planning your test around your level of confidence and preparation, which is what you're sort of asking, Abhishek. And so it's great that you've asked that. um, the first thing that you could do is, and you've already spent a lot of time preparing, but if you really want to be sure that you're at the right level and you've done enough preparation, it's a good idea to get the level of your English checked. And one way you can do this is to take OET Pulse. Pulse is a quick 30-minute test. It's not the actual OET test, obviously. It's just a test that will tell you sort of where you are and how close you are to being at the right level to sit your OET test. So, taking pulse is a good way to understand if your level of preparedness is sufficient to give you a good chance of passing the test, the actual OET test. Um, Now, pulse, as I said, it is it is a test that you can take in 30 minutes. You can take it anywhere, absolutely anywhere. And you can take it on your mobile, you can take it wherever you are. Um, I'm going to post a link to OET Pulse in the chat. Um, and of course, it's something that you might need to invest a little bit on. It's obviously it's not a free test, but investing that little bit right now will really help you in the long run, because it's going to give you a good idea of where you are. And so you don't get into this situation where maybe you weren't at the right level and you went ahead and took the test, and then you didn't get the scores you wanted. So taking OET Pulse is a great first step to understanding your level of preparedness. And of course, you've already dedicated a lot of time, which is great. It looks like you've covered 4 sessions. But if you're thinking about it, once you get your results from Pulse, maybe you need to prepare for a little bit more time. Maybe it tells you that you've still got a little bit way to go. So therefore, then it would be important to think about how much time you can spend studying, how much time you can devote daily, devote weekly, and how much study you really need to do. And planning it that way then will help you understand when you are ready to book your test. So, will that be in a month's time? It could be in a month's time, it could be in 2 months' time, or 3 months' time. So, it really depends on your level of English and sort of where you are, your level of English, how far you are, and how much time you have on your hands to dedicate to studying. All right. So I've got a question here from Dhruv, who joins us on YouTube. And Dhruv saying, if it's a home visit and speaking, how do you identify that patient is known or unknown? So, Dhruv, it's quite simple, really. If you're using an official OET task card, you will see that you have a setting. So, the setting could be a home visit, or it could be a clinic, it could be a ward. You have a setting, and then you have background information, just above the tasks. Now, the background information is really important to read because it tells you things like if you've met the patient before, or if if the patient has just come in to see you, or if you've just gone in to meet them for a purpose. So reading the background information is really important. Reading it carefully and not focusing so much too quickly on the tasks. Um, and like I said, this is true for official OET tasks. They do have enough information there to tell you whether you've met the patient before or if it's the first time that you're visiting their home. Okay, I've got some questions. Baljeet on YouTube asks some tips for Part C in reading. So I'm going to hide that question, Baljeet, just for a second while I put up some tips for reading Part C. And hopefully you can see those coming up. Great. So now if you think about Part C, it's the kind of writing that the kind of reading that you would do when you want to find out more about developments in your field. So you know how usually we say maybe doctors need to keep up to date with their knowledge. Nurses need to keep up to date with their knowledge of what's happening in their field, and that's the sort of reading that you would do in Part C. So it's articles of general medical interest um, that comment on developments in the field, maybe patient experiences, and so on. So it's good to keep that background in mind because it's a different kind of reading that you have to do. Um, and it's the kind of reading that uh, you might not do every day, so it's a good idea to practice those kinds of articles, reading those kinds of articles as much as you can. Now, if when we're talking about the test, obviously the tips that I can give you specifically for Part C are: the first, of course, to manage your time. Now, this might be easy to say, but um, remember that you have 45 minutes for both Part B and Part C. And then in Part C, you've got your two passages. So if you've got to again divide your time and manage your time there. So if you take about 10 to 12 minutes on Part B, on the 6 questions in Part B, that gives you about 35 minutes for your two Part C passages. And then again, divide those up. You've got about 16 to 17 minutes per passage. So it's good to divide up your time and practice that way. If you find that you're not able to answer those questions in about 16 to 17 minutes per passage, then it's probably you probably need to take a little bit of a break from practicing test tasks, and you need to do, as I said earlier, a little bit of reading outside of OET practice tasks. So search the internet. I'm going to recommend a resource in a few seconds that will give you links to non OET reading material that you can use to practice your reading. So it'll help you improve your understanding of these texts and really how fast you are with reading this kind of material. It's not easy, so it's definitely something that you need to spend some time doing. So managing time is the first tip. The second tip is to find evidence for all the options. Now, often what happens is when candidates read the question and the answer options, they look for words or keywords from the answer options in the paragraph. If they find the paragraph has a few keywords that are in a particular answer option, they generally choose that answer option. It's a common trap. It can happen to all of us, but actually that's not a great way to approach it. What you should do is actually to find evidence or reasons from the text, from the paragraph, for why your answer is correct, and also for why the other answers are wrong. And once you do that, you will have confidence that the answer you've chosen is correct. And then the final tip there is to try answering the question using the text only. Now, it's a little bit of a difficult thing to do, to get used to, not to look at the answer options, but it's definitely something you could try. Cover the answer options with piece of paper or something with your hand. Read the question, go to the paragraph, try and answer the question in your own words, without looking at the answer options, and then go back to the answer options and read them. um, if you do this, you'll find that you're less confused, because once you see the options, you have those ideas in your head and you start thinking about those, um, and less about the text. So if you follow this method, it should help you become a little bit more focused on what the text is saying. um, all right, so hopefully those help you. I'm going to put in the chat our complete guide to reading. We've got a complete guide to reading part A, part B, and part C. Um, the complete guide to reading has a lot of examples of the kinds of reading that you can do outside of test tasks. As I said, that will help you really improve. That's where you'll see the most improvement. All right. Okay. Um, all right. I've got a question here from Sam. Sam's asking, on the speaking card, does on examination equal to you have examined the patient? So, Sam, it's difficult really to tell with just that phrase there. And like I said, instead of focusing on one or two words there in the background information, is actually to read the full background information and think about it as a situation, think about it as a real life situation, and not to focus so much on one or two phrases. So I would say perhaps yes, that could be that the task says on examination, this was, you have examined the patient and this is what you found. So yes, then that means you have examined the patient and you can start the role play. You don't need to start by introducing yourself. Obviously, in real life, you would just start with saying something like, "Thank you for letting me examine you," and continue that way. So it really depends on the full background information given there. I would suggest reading it and trying to understand it as a real life situation rather than focusing on just one or two phrases to decide that this is what it is. Okay. Um, all right. So I've got a question from Jahidul on YouTube, and Jahidul is asking, for listening part A, can I write S in brackets? Um, so, for example, if the speaker said medications, but I'm not sure at that time, can I write S in brackets? So, Jahidul, no. You need to write what you hear in the audio, and you need to be accurate. So if the speaker said medication, then that's what you need to write. If they said medications, then that's what you need to write. Your answer will be wrong if you add an S where there is no S that was in the audio. And this is actually quite a common, quite an area that really requires um, some work, often to understand the endings of words, and it's an area where you can make prone to making mistakes and sort of losing marks because you've got the full word, but it's just one sound that's missing. So really, when you're practicing listening part A, of course, do your practice tests, but also listen to real life consultations, get used to different accents where they say words, yeah, but they say words differently. So I'm going to actually put into the chat um, a complete guide to listening part A, which has some resources or references to resources that you can where you can actually listen to a lot of real life examples of this kind of this kind of format. So um, I'm going to put that in the chat. Have a look at that, and that should really help you get used to the way that people say words in different accents. All right, Sana, same question, a similar question. Are abbreviations accepted in listening, like HT and OTC? So, Sana, they would be acceptable if that is what the speaker said in the audio. So, if they said OTC, then that would be acceptable. But if they said, for example, over the counter, then you need to write exactly what you heard in the audio. All right. Okay, I've got some more questions coming in, which I'm going to just scroll for some newer questions. All right. I've got some questions on writing. So I've got a question here from Aarti on YouTube, joining us on YouTube. Aarti is saying, transferring Mr. Baker to your care for further management. Is this good to start an introduction? So is this a good introduction? Aarti, that is definitely just looking at that sentence there. It's not a full sentence, and remember that you are writing a formal letter, so you need to write in complete sentences. And so therefore, if you were to write for if you wanted to write this kind of sentence, you would say, I'm writing to transfer Mr. Baker to your care. Now that's the grammatical side of it, and sort of the kind of writing, the formal writing side of it. But if we're just talking about introductions and how to start a letter, there are different ways to start letter. There's no one single way. It's a good idea to think about the situation and the purpose for why you're writing the letter, to help you frame an introduction. Remember that each set of case notes is unique. Just like you have, every patient is unique. um, they have a unique story, and the healthcare professionals that you're going to be referring them to will have unique roles in their care, because their needs, each patient's needs are different. So therefore, the best introduction is going to be one that's personalized to the case notes, and it takes into account the reason for writing, and it gives the reader sort of a very general high level overview of why are they reading that letter, why is the patient being referred to them, and what do they need to do. So just keep that in mind. The writing guide that I shared earlier is, looking at the purpose criterion. The purpose chapter of the writing guide is a great way to kind of understand this concept a bit more. So I would recommend looking at that. All right. I've got a question here from Arin. Arin joins us on YouTube, and Arin's asking, where can I get reading samples to practice? So, Arin, we have our website, our sample tests on our website. So there are 5 official sample tests there. But in addition, if you would like to purchase additional samples, we've got our reading course. Our reading course is really quite excellent because it's got additional practice materials that are authentic, that are official, that will give you a good idea of what the test is really like. And it's got lots of tips as well. So I'm going to put that link there in the chat. So you can definitely purchase that from our store. um, and just like I said earlier, and because this is quite important for anyone preparing, is that it's great to practice, of course, with your sample tests, and you know do that. But that is sort of not enough. You've got to do a little bit of reading non-OET practice tests and non-OET tasks. So focusing on reading the different kinds of texts, like articles that you see in reading part C, for example. For reading part B, you've got manuals, you've got your handbooks, um, policies. Reading more of those real life examples, real life texts, is really where you're going to see more improvements in your own skill. And then when you do the practice tests, that's when you're going to get the most out of them, because you've spent some time improving your reading skills between practice tests. So again, I'm going to put in the chat the reading complete guide to reading, um, which has lots of references for how you can, read outside of OET tasks. That which is, as I said, it's equally important. Great. So some good questions coming in, and I am going to got a question here from Chinu. And Jinu's asking, could you give us some tips for listening part A? So Jinu, I'm going to just hide your question there and put up some tips like I did earlier. So listening part A, it's what you're listening to. So it's also good to sort of just think about what you're listening to and what the task is. You're listening to a consultation between a patient and a healthcare professional, and it's an extract of the consultation, so it's obviously not the full one. It's 5 minutes of that. And what your task is in listening party is actually to fill in the gaps. Now the gaps are the notes that the healthcare professional is making, and you do this every time. If you think about it, I'm sure um, there's no healthcare professional who doesn't take notes when they're talking to a patient, who doesn't have to do this at some point. So essentially, you've got the notes there, and then there's some gaps. So you need to fill in the gaps. Just like with any notes, real life notes, you've got headings in the notes. Using those headings is going to be really useful, because it's going to give you an idea of the flow of the conversation. So what are they going to do? What are the topics that they're going to discuss? Symptoms, remedies, few further tests, history. What are they going to discuss? So that will already prepare your brain. Your brain will start thinking and focusing on the kinds of things that you would hear during that. So that reading time Using the headings is great, paying attention to them. And then as you go through to keep your place in the audio, the headings will really help you to understand how the conversation is progressing and where you are. The second tip is to anticipate the kind of answer from words around the gap. So there's a lot in listening part A in your question paper, your answer sheet, um, there that can actually help you. And you've got a lot of notes there that are complete notes. Um, once you read When you read them, you are and especially the words around the gap, they'll tell you what kind of word might go there. So they might tell you, okay, it's going to be a body part, likely to be a body part, or maybe it's the name of a medication, or maybe it's a noun, an adjective describing what the patient's symptoms, what they're feeling. So paying attention to the words around the gap will actually help you understand a bit more about what could be that gap. And then finally, writing only one answer. Like I said earlier, it's you only need to write what you hear in the audio, and that'll be quite clear once you've done your used your reading time well. That will be quite clear from, like I said, the headings and the words around the gap. Okay, great. So I've got some more questions here. Just looking for some newer questions coming in. And um, okay, I've got a question here from Sana. Sana's on YouTube. Sana's asking, is it okay to write on behalf of? And the second question is it good to write? It would be greatly appreciated, or it would be appreciated. So that's a second question. So Sana, on the first question, on behalf of, that kind of letter, you know, candidates often call them on behalf of letters. These are not letters that you need to write. It's not a type of letter that's in our in the OET test. I'm just posting in the chat an article that gives you an idea of the different kinds of letters you have, that you could be expected to write, and what your approach should be. The second part of your question is about making a polite request. So you're asking if it's okay to write "it would be appreciated" or "it would be greatly appreciated." So generally, you would write "greatly" to show that you know this is something that you're asking the reader to do, that's uh, perhaps above and beyond what is considered standard. And so you could include "greatly" if that is indeed the case, that you're asking the reader to do something that would normally not be a part of their duty. But if it's a standard request, then just saying "it would be appreciated," that's something that's absolutely fine. Okay. Okay, so I've got a question here from Joyce. Joyce is asking, how do I identify relevant information in writing? So, Joyce, this is something that um, is covered by the assessment. So, when you're thinking about how your letter is assessed, including relevant information for your reader is, of course, really important, and it's covered under the content criterion. Um, the the biggest tip, or the most important tip that I can give you, is to really just keep your reader front of mind when you are reading your case notes. So the writing task will tell you who your reader is, and will often also tell you why you're writing to them. And then, of course, the last section of the case notes just above the task will also give you a little bit more information about why you might need to write that letter. So having that in mind is really what is going to help you understand what you need to select from the case notes. Um, so it's something that, as I said, it's covered in the writing by the writing criterion, by the writing criteria. But we've also got a great blog article, and we call it the reader strategy. So this is actually, the most important tip is to make your reader the priority. Um, so I'm going to post in the chat a link to the blog article for the reader strategy. And if you haven't checked it out, have a look at it. And it's got a lot more explanation about how you can actually keep the reader sort of front of mind as you answer your select your case notes. All right. Um, so we've got a few more recent questions. Um, just looking for some newer ones that right. Okay, I've got some question here, a request from Sai, some tips for part C of listening. So Sai, I'm again going to take off your question there for a minute and pull up my listening part C tips. And again, with listening part C, if you've been around for this for today's session, you would have heard me talk a little bit about reading part C and how reading part C is the kind of reading that you might not do every day. So, in the same way, listening part C, you're talking about listening to interviews or presentations on topics of, again, general medical interest. So these are things that you would do to improve or stay up to date with developments in your field. And this is the kind of listening we don't do every day. I mean, I don't do this kind of listening every day, and definitely, it's something that we don't do every day. So if you're preparing, trying to get used to this kind of these kinds of audios is a good idea. Now, having said that, if we're talking about listening part C and we're doing a practice test, we the first step is to use your reading time effectively. Now, you've got 90 seconds of reading time for your listening part C questions, and it's important to use that time as much as possible, to the in the best possible way. And one way you can do that is, read the questions first. So don't worry so much about the answer options in the first reading. Read the questions and try and understand what are they asking, what's the topic. You have the context sentence that's there at the beginning before the questions, so understanding more about the overall context and then reading the questions with that context in mind will help prepare your brain. Your brain will already start firing all the available information that it has. It will get ready to listen. And so that reading time is really, really important. So use it to read your questions first. If you have extra time, then of course read the answer options. And when you're reading the answer options, think about what is the difference between the answer options. what's the point of difference there. Secondly, to keep your focus. Now, it's very easy to get distracted, or to get distracted, because like I said, we don't listen with extreme concentration for 40 minutes. And listening part C comes at the end of your listening test. So building up that stamina beforehand is really, really important. And so, like I said, more listening of this kind of audio is a really good way to do that. And then listening for 40 minutes straight with complete attention, practicing that is really going to help you as well. And then the third tip is to move on to the next question with the audio. And in OET, this is really quite simple. In an interview, when you're listening to an interview, you move on to the next question with the interviewer's question. So when they ask the next question, you know that, if you've missed an answer, and the interviewers asked another question, you need to know that, you've got to leave that question you couldn't answer and move to the question that they're now focusing on. So that's really important. And then when you're listening to a presentation, uh, in any presentation, a presenter will indicate to the audience when they're moving to the next point. So, keeping your ears, paying attention to that, to the changes in topic there, that's really important. And OET questions will always sort of make that clear. There'll be clear references to the audio in the question. So that should help you as well. Okay. Okay, I'm going to just scroll down for some more questions. Thank you for all the questions coming in. And right. Um, so I've got a question here from Shakina, and she joins us on YouTube. The question is, if you do the test and then um, you improve this, you do the test to improve your score, will the previous result be cancelled? Sakina, I think what you're referring to is sitting a complete test. So let's imagine you sat your OET test in February, and you have you want and you didn't get the score that you wanted, maybe in one subtest, and then you sit the test again in July. Will the previous February test be cancelled? So no, it will not be cancelled. Your The result that you so um, it won't be cancelled. It is what you decide to. So it's the regulator that you are applying to who determines, what scores they accept. If they accept, for example, combining of both those scores, and that is something that you would need to check. Those kinds of rules are something that you would need to check with the regulator that you're applying to. So from our point of view, we don't do that. It's there, your score, it's there from the two tests. It's really up to the regulator that you're applying to. In the case that you are talking about remarking, so there is a situation when, if you haven't got the scores that you thought you would get in one of the subtests, let's say writing, and you give your score, you give your test to be remarked, then when the remarking result is published, then your previous writing score for that one test, that is superseded, or that your new score is the remarked score. And so once that is published, then that means that you can't go back to the old score that you had for that one test. You can, of course, request that your remarking score is not published. So you can do that anytime before the score is published, if you want to stick to your original score that you had. So regarding remarking, I'm going to just post in the chat something about our remarking policy, which you can have a read uh, s- and see. There's a lot more detail than I have covered here, obviously. Okay. I am just all right. So we've got some more questions here, which I'm going to just. We've got the last 10 minutes. So if you've got a question, please post it. I've got a question here from Dinto. Can you list the hyphenated words in OET listening? Um, with listening, like I've just said, you listen, you write what you hear in the audio. Generally, with listening, you're looking at one, or it's a word or a short phrase. And if you're thinking about words that are hyphenated, um, I would say that there is no list of words. Um, all rules of grammar, of spelling, that apply to English in general apply to the listening test. So if you've got a question, or if you're wondering if a word should be hyphenated or not, um, then a really good place would to check would be the dictionary, and that will give you a little bit more explanation about that particular word, why it's hyphenated. In some situations, some words may not be hyphenated, and so on. So there isn't one list. It's really about just looking at words, thinking about, there's not a list of words there for OET listening that are hyphenated, not hyphenated, or a certain way. Like I said, the rules of spelling and grammar that apply generally to English apply to the test. Okay. Okay, I've got a comment from Darshana saying the links that aren't opening. So, Darshana, could you just mention in the chat which links aren't opening? And I will try and post those back in. Okay, I have got a question here, which I can see is more about best material for reading and listening. So, Amar on YouTube and Dr. Hamad Ali, both of them joining on YouTube, um, asking about materials for reading and listening. So, as I said, sort of just a little earlier, there are our free sample tests on our website. There are 5. Um, and of course, there are additional materials for purchase on our OET score. I'm going to post in our listening course. It's got additional practice there. Um, so just posting that in there. And our reading course. So these are official tests that you can purchase, um, which are great. We've also got a lot of free material on our website, which is is there's lots there. So on our ready page, I'm going to put in the chat. Um, our ready page, we've got our study guide there. So on that page, if you haven't seen the study guide, it's definitely something you should download. A lot of links there to additional materials, videos, blog articles, tips, all of that. Very useful, helpful material there in the study guide. So it's absolutely free. So head to our ready page and download that one there. Okay, I've also got a little bit of a resource, an additional resource to share with you, if you haven't seen it already. So, in the chat, if you could post if you've seen our or used our graded sample booklets, if you could just put that in the chat. So, just put in the chat if you have seen our graded sample booklets. All right. So while I'm waiting for your replies there in the chat, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the booklets. Um, they are great resources for reading, for speaking and writing. You have 30 you know, marked letters by assessors, and 30 more candidate role plays that are assessed for uh, 10 different professions. So it's a resource that is really useful because you've got your they're all they're all answers to sample test 5 on our website, and these um, the responses of 30 candidates were chosen from across the globe and different professions, and they were marked by assessors. They're given a grade. So when you go through these 30 samples, you'll really get an idea of what the assessors are looking for, because there's comments by the assessors about the performance of these letters and of these role plays. So it's a really good resource to explore and to have a look at if you're practicing reading and writing, writing and speaking. So I'm going to put that in the chat. Have a look at those. Okay, and I have got a last question that I'm going to pick up from Jahidul. And Jahidul is asking, could you explain the elimination method for reading Part C? And that's a great method to use. The elimination method, or is, I think, a one way of describing basically um, reading your answer options carefully and finding evidence in the text for why an answer option is incorrect. So, of course, when you read the text, you understand why an answer option is correct. So you choose your correct answer. But then going a bit further than that and trying to look for reasons why the others are wrong. That is a really effective way of building confidence that you've got your answer there and that's correct. Okay, so I think we've neared the end of our session. Thank you all for joining. If you haven't had your question answered today, don't worry. We have one more Q&A coming up this month. We have one on the 20th, to Tuesday 20th of August, which is 4:30 p.m. Australian time, which works out to 2:30 in the Philippines, 12 p.m. in India. And if you're joining from a little bit more that side of the world, it's a little bit early in the morning, 7:30 in Nigeria and in the UK. So, Rebecca, my colleague, is going to be on hand there to answer your questions. And if it's urgent and important and you can't wait, then our Facebook page is where you can head, and we answer all of your questions there. You can post your questions on in chat, the messenger service, and we will get back to you. One of the team members will get back to you within 24 hours. So thank you all for joining me today, and until next time, bye for now.